Okay, welcome to our fourth in a series of debates for the upcoming 7 Anchorage Assembly races. Today we're joined by the 3 candidates from District 6, Seat K, which is South Anchorage, Girdwood, Turnagain Arm. I want to thank our sponsors, first off, GCI, the IBW Local 1547, and the Alaska Political Report. We're going to start with opening statements from each candidate. We're going to talk about some issues affecting Anchorage. We're going to have a candidate Q&A period, talk about a few more issues, and we'll go to closing statements. So we drew the order at random. And first of all, let me say we got Zac Johnson, Rachel Ries, and Mikel Insalaco here. So we drew the order at random. And Zac, you're first for your 2-minute opening statement. We're not going to time you, but try to keep it to as close to 2 minutes as possible.
I'll try. Give me a little slap if I start going long.
You were a trooper. I don't want to get taken down.
Thanks for having us, Jeff. Thanks for the landmine, and then thanks to IBEW and GCI, the sponsors, for putting this on. Just to introduce myself real quick, my name's Zac Johnson, running to represent South Anchorage and Girdwood, like these folks over here. I was actually born in South Anchorage, lived the first years of my life in a little cabin down near Indian without electricity or running water. And we moved away when I was young, but I've been back here for about 17 years now in Alaska. I'm a Marine Corps veteran, a former Alaska State Trooper. I graduated from the University of Alaska Anchorage, and I was also a volunteer firefighter down in Girdwood for a number of years. And I've been on my community council up on the hillside for a couple years now, which gave me an appreciation for the work the Assembly does, the fact that local government, while it doesn't always get the most attention, it is what has the most impact on our lives on a day-to-day basis. So I've been looking for opportunities to help out where I can. You know, I've worked with the limited road service area boards to try and identify capital projects in South Anchorage and find funding sources. I've chipped in to do what I can to address the wildfire threat down in South Anchorage and things of that nature. So for me, stepping up to the Assembly is just the next step and really what has been a lifetime dedicated to public service.
Thanks, Zac. Rachel, your opening statement.
Oh, thanks you, Jeff, for having us here. I really appreciate the opportunity. My name is Rachel Ries. I'm running in South Anchorage for Seat K. I am a retired military officer and a parent and a taxpayer and a homeowner. I have served on the Anchorage Municipal Board for the Budget Accounting Office. I have served on my community council as vice president and been a voting member for a couple years. I've also been on the Home and Landowners Organization, finally serving as secretary. So I've had a lifetime of service. In fact, my family's been in the military since 1861, so it's kind of what we do. My son serves now, and what I really got involved with was just seeing the decline in a city I chose to make my home. It's the longest place I've ever been in one spot, and I think it's important to work to preserve it.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.
Mikel, opening statement, 2 minutes.
Absolutely. My name is Mikel Insalaco, and I was born and raised here in Anchorage, and I'm now raising the 4th generation here, born in Alaska. And now that I have a young son who's going to be approaching school age very soon, for me, I want to make sure that his future and my family's future is bright. And right now, I feel like there needs to be some solutions. And we keep introducing the same sorts of people, the same sorts of solutions, and I don't think we're going to solve problems that way. And over my career, I've been fortunate enough to work with national brands as well as local initiatives to solve issues such as workforce development, youth mental health awareness and suicide, as well as issues like the COVID-19 pandemic, where I assisted helping educating children and families on up-to-date news, as well as providing at-home education. I believe that with my perspective as a business development manager and as a professional working with small businesses and nonprofit initiatives, I can help bring real solutions to Anchorage.
Thanks, Mikel. First thing I want to ask you guys about, and I'll start with you, Mikel, is there's 7 assembly races. 5 of them have no incumbent, so there's going to be at least 5 new members on the assembly, and there could be more. Only 2 incumbents are running. A couple went to the legislature, Jamie Allard and Forrest Dunbar, and one was termed out, Pete Peterson, and then Quinn Davidson's not running for re-election. So if you were to be elected, how do you plan on navigating being on a body where there's at least almost half the assembly is going to be new, and there's kind of a loss of a lot of institutional knowledge?
Well, I think more than anything, it's a matter of establishing a baseline first and foremost. Anytime that I step into a new role, whether it's working with a nonprofit initiative or working with a new company, I first want to come in without any assumptions. And I think especially because we're coming in with a lot of new faces, it's important for us to come in and understand a baseline of what's happening. A lot of those perspectives don't get seen until you get everybody at the table. And so for me, I think getting a seat at the table with the different aspects of what affect our industry in town, so the builders, the educators, and everybody in between, and understanding what we can do to help fill the gap and where we're at currently. I think an assessment with cooperation and having everybody at the table is where we start.
So Rachel, same question, a lot of new people in the assembly. How do you plan on kind of navigating that if you were to win and being on a body with a lot of new folks?
Well, actually, this falls right in my wheelhouse. In the military, I was part of a team. We were kind of the fixers. We routinely went to places that were falling apart, falling behind. In fact, one of my crowning jewel assessments was a unit that was so terrible it got kicked out of Korea. And what you do generally, yeah, you got to want that one. What you generally do is you assess the personalities, you retain the knowledge where you can maintain contact with the people that have left. Just because they're not on the assembly doesn't mean you can't pick up the phone and talk to them. You reach out to those department heads and those stakeholders in the industries that have a vested interest in the city, and you kind of do a formal assessment. Then you look at where the commonalities are and you start working from there.
Zach, same question on the kind of new assembly and navigating that. If you're to win.
Yeah, I mean, certainly attitude plays a big role in that, right? And just coming in with the mindfulness that there is a lot to learn, a desire to engage with everyone who's involved in local government in a respectful manner, I think is an important part of it. I also feel relatively well prepared stepping into this. I mean, I have had a lot of direct involvement with all the community councils in South Anchorage, or at least most of them, the limited road service area boards, the Girdwood Board of Supervisors, spent a lot of time talking to past, present members of the Anchorage Assembly in South Anchorage, Randy Salt, Suzanne LaFrance, John Weddleton, hearing about the work they've done, what the issues and priorities they think they need to be for South Anchorage, studying up on the Hillside District Plan. I mean, the list goes on. So I've looked for opportunities to be engaged for a number of years now. So when I step into that role, I think I have a pretty decent understanding of what needs to be done, and then some thoughts on how we can go about accomplishing that.
Next thing I want to talk about is homelessness. We have the Sullivan Arena. It was stood up during COVID, and we have this Centennial Park issue last year where they tried to kind of put the folks in the Centennial Park, and there's a Golden Lion, there's these buildings, and this issue goes back a lot longer than this administration, the previous administration. It goes back decades, and it does seem like visibly it's gotten worse, and there's been a big fight between the current mayor and the assembly over the proposals and kind of how to solve it. So I'll start with you, Rachel. I mean, what are your thoughts about this problem, and how do we solve this and move forward instead of just, it seems like every kind of year it just is the same kind of battle about cold weather and summer and what do we do?
Yeah, no, rinse, repeat, right? That's not what I'm interested in. So I think there's been an inordinate focus on housing, and I don't necessarily agree that housing is the answer. I think it's part of the solution, but I think it's kind of an end state part of the solution. We need more treatment facilities. We need more detoxification beds. We need more involvement from the Native community for the people that they're sending down here from the villages. And we need to look at programs that are private programs that can be nimble and flexible and are willing to work with the public office, right? I like the idea of a public intake, and then we're putting them into the unique departments, right, out in the private sector that will deal with their specific issues, drug addiction, sexual trauma, lack of education, and they just kind of fell down in life. That happens. We have foster kids that age out of the system, no plan, right? What do you do with them? I'd like to see something like a tax incentive offered to businesses and educational institutions and trade institutions where they hire these people, because I'm also concerned about recidivism. So that's really where I would start, is looking at a holistic approach.
Thanks, Zach. I'll go to your same question on the, and I didn't mention there's a navigation center idea, and there's been a lot of different ideas, but how do we fix this problem that seems to be just kind of, almost the same thing happening over and over again? The definition of insanity.
Well, it's a tough one, but it's certainly one that we need to address for a number of reasons that I think are pretty self-apparent. I think a navigation center does make sense as part of the solution. Now, there's the proposal for the one on Tudor Road, and there were some problems with the process there. There's also the possibility of utilizing the Arctic Rec Center for that. And I've seen a little bit of the comparison between the two, and I think there's some cost-effective, cost-benefit reasons to consider one over the other, but that should be a piece of it, a navigation center. We also have 250 beds, I think, that are expected to come online this spring and spread across 3 or 4 different facilities. And those will be managed by private entities, which, like Rachel, I agree, is how it should be. That gets us close to being able to move out of the Sullivan Arena, which I think absolutely needs to be a goal, and I don't know anyone who disagrees with that. So there is some progress that's happening. It's about keeping our eye on the ball and making sure that we maintain forward momentum on all these things. I also think housing is part of it, though, right? We focus a lot on the people with the mental health and the serious substance misuse issues. And we do need to make sure we connect those people with the right services. But we also have working families who just, get behind on the rent, right? I mean, a lot of people in this town live in paycheck to paycheck. And if something comes up, they find themselves out on the streets. And then once you're there and you don't have a home address, it often becomes cyclical.
Well,
so
we're definitely talking about housing too on this one, so that's going to come up as well.
All right, well, we'll talk about that when it comes up. But it is one of the things we need to do to address homelessness, because it is a broad spectrum of people, and we need to bring a broad spectrum of solutions to the table.
Thanks, Mikel. On homelessness, this kind of Sullivan Arena, all these different things, and how do you solving this problem or making it better?
Absolutely. I think I do want to reiterate the fact that I don't believe that housing is the core issue, because there are other communities where housing is available. And if that was the case, then people would go there. Instead, it's that Anchorage is a concentration of amenities. And as a result, it allows for an environment where people can come here and essentially enjoy the amenities that we have. And so there's kind of two pieces to that. Anchorage bears the brunt of essentially providing those amenities to the state and to different communities. And I think that we do need to look at, interestingly enough, a new tax structure where property owners don't bear it. And I think, something like a non-resident sales tax, which I know there have been some concerns about how that would be navigated legally underneath the state constitution. But I do believe a non-resident sales tax is something that we should consider to help fund some of these services. And then once we have the money, I think it's a matter of understanding how we're using the money. There was a lot of dollars that have been received through the alcohol tax, but yet the RFPs don't have any objective-based milestones. They're very much so based off of very simple requirements. And I think by having more structured proposals for the community that are based on actual progress and impact, we can truly make an impact. But unfortunately, right now, what we're doing is that we're making a lot of assumptions and decisions without involving the people already doing the work. And then the other side of it is that I feel like the money that's being put out there doesn't have enough to the public non-government community, doesn't have enough oomph behind it, enough reason or purpose. There's an RFP right now for the alcohol tax out there, and it's pretty much an open book. I'd rather we see objective-based RFPs where when you place somebody, you get funding, right? If you can prove that process, then guess what? You get funding to add a bed to your organization, right? That's the way that I would like to see it, as opposed to these open RFPs and essentially having the money be spent by the city.
The next question, we're going to talk about housing. You guys all mentioned that. Let's start with you, Zach. The Holton Hills proposed development was recently stopped by the Assembly in Girdwood. It was a 2-year process for an RFP to develop some heritage land bank land. So I want to talk about the Holton Hills, but also just generally housing. I mean, the average price of a house in Anchorage is almost $500,000. We're not seeing much building. The AHFC has said we need 25,000 new housing units, by 2026. There's many builders that joke in the Valley, and they thank Anchorage for not being so friendly because they're building in the Valley. So, Holton Hills, that thing in Girdwood, your thoughts there, but also just generally the housing kind of issue in Anchorage where it's so expensive and there's not a lot of building happening.
Yeah, I came out pretty early expressing some concerns about the process with Holton Hills. And I will give credit where credit's due. I think the Assembly made a genuine effort to address some of those community concerns. At the end of the day, there were some key questions that just weren't getting answered, right? About how do we valuation the land? What was the process going to be for actually moving the project forward? And without a lot of confidence in the ability to execute, I understand why it did not move forward at the time. I still think it's worth reconsidering. I think when we are looking at a multi-use plan like that includes a variety of different products, including multifamily for comes in at a price point that people in the community can afford, then absolutely we should try and chart a path forward. At the Anchorage level, it's a huge concern. I think we had, it was around 2016, 1,500 residential building permits were issued, and it was around 300 for the last couple of years. So we need to figure out a way to identify the bottlenecks and make it more feasible for people to take on projects like this. Zoning's a part of it. Maybe that means the Assembly going in and proactively rezoning certain areas so that it's not entirely on the developer to take that step. I think we need to look at ways to simplify multi-use developments, right? I mean, planned use developments, I think, are a great way to bring some pretty good products into the market, but the fees associated with trying to get a plan like that approved are like 5 or 6 times what it is for a simple rezone. Figuring out ways to make it cost-effective to builders is part of it. We also talk about public-private partnerships. There's a couple projects like that downtown, and I think we should continue to consider options like that, especially towards the urban center.
Mikel, I'll go to you on the Holton Hills, development in Girdwood, and what do you think about that? And then also just same general housing in Anchorage and the high cost and the low supply.
With Holton Hills in particular, I believe that for me, I was very, very disappointed to see it get shut down and instead not find compromise. I think that, in my opinion, it's unacceptable to shut down a project like that instead of doing whatever you can, closed door session, whatever it takes to essentially get it done and to find some sort of compromise in a process that people can trust. A lack of trust in a process means that the process is broken. It doesn't mean that you need to shut down the project. And that's what really disturbed me about it, was the fact that we recognize that the process doesn't protect projects like this. We don't have faith in it, but yet we don't take any steps to restore faith in that process. And that brings me to the next step, which is, I think that there are a lot of common sense steps that can be taken to make it so there's less obstacles for builders. And whether it's there's some more difficult steps such as investing in infrastructure, making sure we can get out to new land that can be developed, because frankly, the developable land, actually getting out there, paying for everything it takes to get power out there and zone and everything else in between, is often too much of an obstacle for someone to even want to invest here, which is why they're building out in the valley. And so I think it's a matter of, we need to look at it from the investment perspective of how do we invest in Anchorage? And I think the city needs to look at it from that perspective. I'd rather see more funds go into getting houses built by essentially subsidizing the costs of those fees as opposed to, restricting new building.
And then Rachel, same question on Holton Hills, the project in Girdwood that got stopped, and then generally, housing in Anchorage, the high cost and the low supply.
Well, I'm kind of a divided mind on the Girdwood issue with Holton Hills. I do think there needs to be development out there, and there needs to be affordable housing.
I should say this is your district. This is the South
This is
Anchorage
absolutely
district,
our
so-
district, yes.
so-
And Girdwood is its own unique community with its own needs and issues, but it does need to have that lower interest housing. I'd see something like deed restrictions, mixed use zoning out there for dense housing. Maybe something where you're looking at dry housing that's seasonal with a bathhouse and a guard. I mean, there's a lot of simple options out there, but I supported voting down the Holton Hills because ultimately when an entire community rises up against something, you have to say that you respect that process. I don't think any community council or organization in this city would want to be dismissed when they were unified on an answer of no. So that from a legislative public servant perspective, I agreed with the no. I just wish it had gone better.
And then just generally, housing in Anchorage as far as,
Yeah, a lot
high
of people have
cost and-
sticker shock when they come up here.
like I said, the average price now is almost $500,000.
That is about the average price of a home until you get above Upper Hillside in our district, and you
And it
get
goes
into
up.
and then it's exponentially more expensive. What you see a lot with the houses is they were born when code was kind of the Wild West back in the 80s, and there's no grandfathering, right? Code conflicts itself. It conflicts with Title 21, Title 23. It's a lot easier to build new, unfortunately, than it is to rebuild or remodel something that's existing. So that represses a cheaper home, right? Something that's older is going to be less expensive. Additionally, we have bad schools. People don't want to bring their kids here, and they certainly don't want to pay a mint to do it. And we don't have robust economic development. We don't have tie-ins on what are they called? Infrastructure, sewer, water, drains for commercial development. So when you have that, you don't have a robust economic center bringing workers here that want to buy houses.
Next thing I want to start asking, I'll start with you, Mikel, is the relationship between the Assembly and the mayor has been pretty contentious the last year and a half. Meetings have become very toxic. There was kind of the mask mandate deal. There's been some veto overrides, and it's just been very contentious. And I remember, years ago, these meetings were pretty boring.
Yeah.
And now they're quite entertaining, but it's also very difficult for anything to happen. So I guess I'll start with you. As we talked about before, it's going to be a lot of new members. If you were to win, how do you plan on navigating the relationship with you and the Assembly and the mayor?
For me, the biggest thing is that it's difficult to say how anything's going to turn out. But my perspective is focusing on the things that you do align on. I don't like the idea of creating resistant battles, because what ends up happening is that if neither side accomplishes what it achieves, then we just wasted a whole bunch of time and money. And that's my biggest concern, is that when we have a lot of these issues, which are legitimate issues that have been brought out in the Assembly, between the mayor and the Assembly, whether it's hiring practices or spending, I think when it comes to spending, we need to make sure that we do whatever we can to hold accountable everybody who's spending our tax dollars, because $2.5 to almost $5 million for something that really didn't accomplish anything is atrocious to me.
Is it navigation center?
Yes, and when I heard that sticker shock, it really upset me, because there's a lot of organizations out there that could have benefited from that. So for me, it's a matter of focusing on the issues that we do agree on and trying to do whatever we can to get that done. I also feel like when you work together on issues that you do agree on, you feel like you can have some common ground to work on the things that are more difficult. But I feel like it's been a contentious relationship from day one, and that's the reason why they've never been able to find common ground, because they never started with common ground.
Rachel, I'll go to you next on the mayor assembly relationship and how kind of contentious it's been, and how do you plan on improving that, or what you would do if you were to be on the Assembly?
God, I really agree with a lot of what Mikel said, but ultimately I too want to address the issue that there's a lot of assumption out there that I'm going to be Bronson's girl, and nothing could be further from the truth. Ultimately, I think every public servant needs to be held accountable, whether I like them or not. And I don't see a lot of adult behavior from either side of the legislative or executive branch. I see a lot of digging in, a lot of ego, and a lot of arrogance. And I would also find common ground. You've got to come with an open mind. There's a quote I keep on my phone. It's Walt Whitman. It says, "Be curious, not judgmental." And that's not for me to tell other people. That's for me to remind myself. Come in with your mouth closed and your ears open. See what they have to say first. Maybe it's a good idea. The message is always more important than the messenger.
Zach, I'll go to you on the relationship with the mayor and the assembly, and what your thoughts on that and kind of how to improve that.
Yeah, I mean, when you're out campaigning, you're talking to hundreds and hundreds of people. And one of the remarkable things I've noticed is across the political spectrum, everyone points to this as an issue, right? And some people may point fingers more at the assembly, some more at the mayor, but everyone is I think, very frustrated by the inability to just get the job done. And you're right, the partisanship, the personality conflicts have raised the temperature in the room to where we're just not addressing the issues. I think just coming in as a fresh face, as you pointed out, we're going to have almost half the assembly, or possibly even more than half of the assembly, will be new people. I think there's a chance there for us to do a reset in relationships, because we're not coming in with all the baggage that I think has led to some of the acrimony. So I'm hopeful for that. Another thing that gives me hope is we by and large agree on what the issues are, right? Everyone talks, yes, we need to do better with plowing, roads, homelessness, housing, public safety. The fact that we can agree on that and it just becomes a discussion of what is the best way to go about achieving these goals, I think opens it up for more opportunities for collaboration, right? And I'll tell you, I don't mind having people challenge my ideas, and I'll be willing to adjust my position if I think somebody has a better idea to put out there. But I think just focusing on the issues and solving the problems, I think is the way we move forward on this.
Okay, we're going to move to the candidate Q&A, and there's 3 of you. A lot of the races have 2 people. So what I'm going to do is you're allowed 2 questions, and we'll start with you, Rachel. You can ask the same question to either one of both of your opponents, or you can ask them each a different question. So it's kind of up to you, but I'll let you go first, and you can ask, like I said, the same question to both of them, or you can ask each one of them a question, and we'll rotate the order. So.
Okay, well, I actually am going to ask a question I get asked a lot at the door, which is, where do you fall on the political spectrum? I know where I fall. I'm a conservative. I'm a fiscal conservative, definitely on economic policies, social issues. I'm very middle of the road. But they are very confused about who to vote for, and even though it's a nonpartisan race, this is something they care deeply about. So I'd like to hear from my opponents where they fall.
Okay, so her question's going to both of you, so we'll start with you first.
Absolutely. I'm a libertarian, and I have been the majority of the time I've been registered. And for me,
you just ran as a libertarian last time.
I just ran as a libertarian for state
we
house.
know.
And,
go figure.
And for me, I believe the most power that should be given to government is the individual's agency. And for me, I want to do whatever I can where it makes sense to empower the individual. There's shared decisions that we have as a society, and for me, I don't want to decide anything on how you live your life, as long as you're not affecting other people, first and foremost. There's no opinion I have that I want to force on you. And the second thing is for me, I want to make sure that we're spending people's money responsibly for those shared decisions. That's really what it comes down to for me.
The classic libertarian live and let live, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And we'll go to Zach next on the question, I guess, where you fall on the political spectrum.
Yeah, I've always been an undeclared voter, and I think everyone has to put in the work to earn my vote. No one is entitled to take my vote for granted because they're associated or affiliated with a particular political party. I really look at the value of the person's character and the quality of their ideas when I make my determination. Whether you think I'm more conservative, more liberal, probably just depends on what issue we're talking about and how strongly you feel about it. If it's Second Amendment issues, I will come across as sounding very conservative. If we're talking about a women's right to choose, I'll sound pretty liberal. Whether you think I'm more liberal or conservative ultimately on the spectrum probably weighs on how you weigh these things against each other. But really, while it's fair for people to ask these questions, I do want to point out the fact that this is a nonpartisan race, and ultimately doing the job of managing the city is not about partisan issues, but just about good governance and focusing on the problems. Whether or not road plowing is a conservative or liberal issue, I don't know. And frankly, I don't care. Let's just figure out how to do it.
Okay, Rachel, if you want to do a rebuttal, it's up to you. If you don't want to, no big deal. Okay, we're going to go next to Mikel. You can ask them the same question. It's probably the lazier, or you can ask them each a question.
You called me lazy.
No, it's easier. No, it's easier. I said it's better that way because then save a little time. But it's up to you how you want to proceed. So.
Absolutely. I just want to ask about just kind of a 2-part in one question, but police transparency, 2-part, qualified immunity and body cameras. Just want to know your opinion. And I can share
both of them.
Am I supposed to state mine first? I guess.
No. I mean you can. I'm actually I'll be asking about the body cams later. So
okay.
That's one of the questions. But how about we start with Zach on that question, and then we'll go to Rachel.
Yeah, I mean, I was a state trooper for 8 years, you know, and I understand it's a difficult job, and you are subject to a high degree of scrutiny, as you should be. Body cameras, I think, make a lot of sense. You know, I like a lot of people, and I'm a little disappointed it's taken this long to get to where, well, it's not quite implemented, but it's going to arbitration, so I think we can expect to see a resolution there soon, and I will be glad to see them out in the field. You know, when I was a law enforcement officer, I would have loved to have a body camera because I conducted myself in an appropriate and honorable way, and the more evidence I have to support how I was going about doing my business, you know, it's more of a defense for me, right, than it is a liability. And I think that's how most officers perceive it. So absolutely, I'm all for body cameras. When it comes to qualified immunity, it is hard to do the job without a measure of protection in place, right? You know, I mean, it is a difficult job, and just by your very nature, you are doing things that people are not going to like. Like if you break the law, I have to take you to jail. You may not agree with that. If you think there was misconduct, then I think it is better to address that at the agency level. You know, and if there are officers who are bad actors, then certainly we should hold them accountable and get them out of there, but I'm not opposed to qualified immunity.
Okay, we'll go to you next, Rachel. And I think the question is about body cams and then qualified immunity.
Yeah, so on the issue of body cams, I have absolutely no issue with transparency in the public square. Coming from a service aspect, I was a medevac pilot, and there are some things we say behind closed doors that are wildly inappropriate because if you don't laugh, you're going to cry, right? They're high pressure jobs. So I think once you get outside the public square, they should have the ability to remove those. And so there should be a clear line there. But other than that, I have zero issues with them. It is, he's right, a defense. I would have loved to have a camera in where we had journalists with us and they would edit and then, you know, you had no rebuttal. So I'm all for them. And as far as qualified immunity, it's the same. You are doing things that people don't like. Nobody enjoys the police coming to see them, unless you're the one that called them. Right, and the concern with bad actors is really, it's an issue of cronyism. People are concerned that the good old boy system is going to protect another good old boy who's done wrong. And I think there needs to be an ombudsman or a whistleblower, some sort of third-party agency that can address complaints from the public.
Okay, and then Mikel, if you want to provide a rebuttal?
Yeah, no,
your comments.
Yeah, no, all I wanted to share from my perspective on qualified immunity is I believe that officers absolutely need to have protections in the role that they have. Mm-hmm. My biggest thing is that if citizens need to defend their right to defend themselves, then I believe an officer should also have to stand up to the same scrutiny. Because you know, the threat of life is very similar for anybody that's essentially experiencing a situation like that. The job and the nature of the job puts them more at risk of that. But it's very difficult for me, and I struggle with the fact that you know, I believe that there should be an internal audit process, and if they pass that, I think they should be good to go. If there's any question of the conduct, or if there should be a governing body that should be allowed to raise question to that, and I think criminal charges should be allowed. My biggest thing is I think civil liability, complete removal from civil liability as far as lawsuits and whatnot go. In the case of if they're not found criminally liable, I think that protection is what I would limit it to. For body cameras, I think that it's ridiculous that it's gone on so long in Anchorage with not getting them since they've been funded since 2021. Mostly because of the fact that I understand that there needs to be things worked out amongst the union, but I have a hard time believing that it's not something that can't be worked out over 30 days. And so the fact that this is continuing quarter by quarter and we keep getting told next year, next, you know, end of the year, whatever else, just doesn't make sense to me. So for me, I would just like to see that, you know, we kind of have the same standards held for, you know, police and citizens.
You took one of my questions. Body cams is on here.
Sorry.
No, it's good. So we'll go to you, Zach. Next, Zach, if you want to maybe stick in line with asking them the same question, I can do that. Or if you want to ask them a separate one, it's up to you.
Yeah, no, I'll ask one for both of you guys. You know, you drive around South Anchorage, and a lot of our roads are in a pretty sad state of repair. And it is a safety issue to some extent, because that is the egress routes these communities need in the event of a disaster or wildfire. They're also notoriously hard to find funding for these projects, in part due to the LRSA system we have in place. What ideas do you guys have to have some of these infrastructure needs, in particular roads, addressed?
For the folks who don't know, the LRSA is limited road service area. So it's the areas where the city's not really, it's kind of a little mini board that controls, and there's a lot of those up in South Anchorage. So
yeah, I think it's about 20 of them or something.
There's a significant amount, yeah. You want to go? You want me to go?
I can go real quick.
Okay.
I think
I like this. You guys are kind of self-regulating. I like that.
Considering opening up private contracts for snow removal and then also doing it on a more like district basis, so that way you don't have one company that might have a point of failure. I think it'd be interesting to see if we could actually have multiple contracts entertained to cover areas, and even have a stipulation in there where they could extend and cover other areas as needed at a certain rate. I think we could probably see some pretty competitive things happen with that. They could save us some money. And And then I also would like to see what we could do to look at what Oklahoma, Ohio, and other states and communities have done when it comes to private-public partnerships, and looking at actually community action board oriented tax projects. So they're actually doing projects where people, the public, can elect something they want done infrastructure-wise, and then a tax is raised for a very specific period of time to fund it, and then the project gets finished and it's done. No more money is issued. There's no pulling out of random funds. The project itself is elected by the people, chosen by the people, and then funded for a limited period of time. I would love to see a structure like that be presented so people could opt into it to help fund projects as they see fit.
Very libertarian over here. We'll go to Rachel next on the LRSA system and the roads.
So it is a problem in District 6. We have the LRSAs, and they use a lot of the same crews that the city uses, and they get it done faster and they get it done better. And they get it done for cheaper, too. I think there's systemic toxic issues between the administration and the union that's driving some work rule issues that hobble us for getting it done in an economical and efficient manner. I also would like to see something, if we are going to continue to use unions and bargaining agreements where they are discussing like kind of a winter, I mean, it snows every year, right? Why don't we have winter work rules? And we have a maintenance shop that's only open Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. Plows break every day of the week, 7 days a week. We had a huge maintenance backlog leading to a lot of the issues we experienced this winter in particular. So if you look at it, it does need to be a systemic approach to kind of reworking and making more efficient the system we have. And with the LRSAs themselves, they do something very similar to what you were talking about, where they vote in something. So maybe a large hillside service area where they could do those kinds of projects. I know my community council brought up an issue with speed bumps on my street, and John Weddleton turned us down because he said it wouldn't be equitable to other parts of the city. And we were like, why? We're paying for it. This frees up city money for you to do something else.
Okay, Zach, I'll let you do a rebuttal if you'd like.
Yeah, I do like the local control that the LRSA boards give to their communities, and then they do put the contract out to bid, and then there's a private contractor that provides the service, and I think that model works. I think there's some opportunities for improvement. For example, if a contractor fails to deliver, there's no recourse right now. I think we should find ways to address that. But in terms of the road improvement projects, it's difficult because LRSAs only receive sufficient funds to really do basic maintenance. However, I think there are some opportunities with the infrastructure bill in particular to find federal funding for a lot of this. The South Anchorage Resilience Committee has done some really excellent work to identify some of the safety hazards these roads present. They're working on a community wildfire protection plan that'll unlock our ability to access certain federal grant programs that I think can go towards dealing with some of these projects that have been notoriously hard to fund. I went out and helped put together a list of them last year. We got them up to state. They got into the CIP list and CAPSIS, and then none of them got funded. But we need to find a way forward.
Well, because you guys covered the snow plowing, we'll talk about snow plowing in a second on body cams. I'm going to ask a question that's not on my list, but I just kind of thought about it. You guys live in a district which is access to the Chugach State Park, and we've done a lot of reporting on an issue on the Stewart Trail where there was a fence put up and there was, it was blocked. There's also just parking issues and, this whole area where this is like where a lot of the people who live in Anchorage want to go access the park. So this is not a question I was planning on asking, but maybe we'll start with you, Rachel, on, access to the park and, parking issues and public access in the Chugach. And I guess maybe just talk about that and your kind of thoughts about, a lot of people move here when they're not leaving. But the Chugach Park is one of our gems here in Anchorage, and most of the access is in this district.
No, absolutely. The rural-urban interface is priceless. It's one of the things that makes South Anchorage so fantastic to live in. It was top 3 on my list why I bought there. It gives my kids a playground that I don't have to pay for, right? It's not in my backyard, I don't have to mow it. It's fantastic. I do know the issue you're talking about with the Stewart Trail and what the neighbors were concerned about, right? People were parking, people were leaving trash, people were bringing their dogs and no dog bags. And that's a legitimate concern. You invest in a home, it's the most expensive thing you'll ever buy, probably. So you want to protect it. But I do agree with if it's a public land, it should have public access protected. I do want to see some sort of remedy available to property owners for people who do malicious damage or are careless in those areas, but I don't think access should overall be restricted.
Yeah, I'll go to you, Zach, on the public access. And I was going to mention too, you go to the summer day, the flat top, you want to park, and it's like, sometimes there's no parking, it's a mess, and the road's very narrow, so kind of access to the public lands in the Chugach Park in that district.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a large reason why we bought the house we did is because it is right almost right next to the Chugach, and I love getting out in the park. I'm probably there 3 or 4 days a week. And access for all of Anchorage is essential, and it's gotten to be, I was going to use a dirty word, but it's gotten to be very, very bad lately.
We're not FCC, so you can say whatever.
It's a shit show. We'll just put it out there. Yeah, thank you. And part of the problem is because a lot of these trailhead accesses, they fall within those LRSA boundaries. And as we were talking about before, they don't really have the funds to address it. I think the ballot proposition that we are going to see this spring that would allow for an area-wide bowl-wide service area that would have the capacity to bond projects for trail access and Chugach Start Park access is a great idea, and it's something that was put forward by our 2 current Assembly people, Randy Salt and Suzanne LaFrance. And it's also something that's covered in the Hillside District Plan, which I think is a great model for how we address a lot of these South Anchorage issues. So I think the ballot proposition is a great step forward, and I am highly supportive of it, and I think it could have a real impact.
Mikel, on the topic of the Chugach access, public access to the park, and some of the challenges with parking and just access in general.
Yeah, and I do struggle with this issue because I don't believe in
libertarian.
I do absolutely, and I don't believe in utilizing eminent domain on people's personal property. But in Alaska, though, we have a variety of trails that have been established. Even in Wasilla, I looked at a property that had a hunting trail that went right through the middle of it, and I went to go call around and ask her, like, if it's established, the reality of it is people have been using it to access, and it's well known. Like, even if you want to fight them on it, they can fight you back on it, and it's probably not worth the battle. I was told that while looking at other property, and I think so I put a lot of it on the property owner because I think it was something that should have been assumed when they purchased that property.
Stewart Trail you're talking about?
Yes, Stewart Trail in particular. But then you also have issues like, Campbell Lake, and access to that, right?
I've heard of that.
Where's that access?
Not there yet.
And then that one, that's another tricky issue. I think it's kind of 2 parties, right? Ensuring that if, as developments get done, that we make sure that access is there and protected for the people, and that those don't get overlooked. And when it comes to properties like Stewart Trail, I think it's complicated. I think that releasing property access for the people was the right decision, though. But I do want to see what we can to protect the property owner from damage, though, and that's a serious concern.
Yeah, no, I agree. We've talked about snow plowing. I want to address it again, and we've talked a little bit about it. But we live in an subarctic city, winter city. We were the pitch for the Winter Olympics, and obviously it's been a lot of snow and it's 3 storms in December. But even going forward months, we're still seeing a lot of roads that aren't fully plowed, and some of the roads where it's 2-lane, 4-lane roads, it's kind of like 3 lanes because it's 1.5 on each side. So I'll start with you, Mikel, on this snow plowing situation, and how do we make it to where people, because we had schools canceled 10 days. People not being able to get to work. I mean, there's a huge economic impact on the private sector and the public sector for not being able to get to work on the road. So I'll start with you on that.
Well, that's the funny thing is you mentioned the economic impact, and I feel like that gets ignored a lot when we talk about these. Oh, schools are closed, can't get to work. Get to work is great, but we're talking about total economic activity. You look at any news report of a major city that has snow activity in lower 48, and you hear about millions of dollars or billions of dollars in economic activity affected because of a snowstorm. Well, that's the normal in Anchorage, is to be affected by the snow and have a loss of economic activity. And I don't find, I find that investing in that should be more important. I think that if we, that being demonstrated is something that I don't think is told enough. For me, I do believe, and going back to what I mentioned earlier, in looking at whatever we can to diversify the options that we have and have more competition for snow removal. That's what I really would like to see.
Zach, I'll go to you next on the plowing. I should say that I spent a lot of time in Juneau for the session, and there's been some big storms in Juneau lately, and I was pretty shocked. I mean, the roads were actually just pretty plowed the next day. So it was just interesting being in a place like Juneau, a smaller town, but I mean, the roads were plowed. So this, plowing issue, the economic impact, and just kind of the fact that we're in a winter city and we've had a real challenge with road plowing this year.
Yeah, I mean, it's never going to be easy, but like you said, it's had a tremendous impact, and I think it's fair to say that it has not been up to a reasonable standard. And we were warned, as early as last summer, that we did not have sufficient equipment operators and we didn't have sufficient parts to maintain the equipment. And the problem was not addressed at the time. So we came into the season without the resources we need to provide an adequate level of service. And so we've been scrambling to plug the hole afterwards with private contractors, which is ultimately going to end up costing the city of Anchorage more, right? Because we're essentially paying these people plus their overhead plus the profit to do a job that should be managed by and large by municipal employees, I think, within the bowl. So yeah, I would say next year when these issues are brought to our attention, it is incumbent on the Assembly and the administration to make sure that they're addressed, that we provide these people fair wages and benefits to where we're able to attract and retain people to do this work, because it's essential. And when we don't do it, the costs are tremendous.
So Rachel, same question on the snow plowing and the economic cost and just being able to, get around.
Just getting around. Yeah, no, there's no doubt a tremendous economic cost, but it is a winter city. You're right. We have snow every year. Lake Otis, that I used to get to and from out of my neighborhood, always becomes a 3-lane road. It's not supposed to be. And there's a lot of talk, so I want to see proactive on this, because there's a lot of talk about narrowing lanes, choking down transportation lanes in favor of this 15-minute city, these green initiatives. And while I'm in favor of good stewardship of the resources, we already can't get the streets plowed, and you want to make the roads narrower. It seems like we are not being very long-term in our thinking with our city planning, with our proactive plans to work issues that are known, and we were not on it when we got warned back in May about this. But that feeds into a different issue. It's not discrete. We are short workers across the city. They're leaving in droves. So you can want the workers all you want, but if they're not there to hire, they're not there to hire. We need to fix some other issues. Maybe people will show up.
That kind of segues into my last question. You guys look at my questions. You guys, you're all pretty good at know what's going on. Anyways, I'll start with you, Rachel. Anchorage, Alaska, for the last 10 years has lost population. We have this homelessness problem. There's a worker problem. Snow plowing we talked about. Last summer, I took a picture of the park strip. It was basically the grass was all dead. And that's one of our kind of crown jewels. So housing, we've talked about that. So there's a lot of challenges. I guess, what's your vision for the next 10 years in Anchorage, and are you optimistic or pessimistic with all these challenges we're facing?
I am really on the fence about whether or not I'm optimistic or pessimistic. It's really going to depend on the outcome of this election, the direction the city takes, and the mayoral election next year. I would love to be able to be optimistic, as it were. But the reality is, I would like to see a total merit-based investment in our schools. We have a ridiculous amount of real estate in our structure with ASD. We have schools that are under 60% density. We have the lowest student population we've had since the 1970s. We're routinely 50 or 49th. People don't want to stay here. I see people all the time leaving because they don't want their kids in our schools. That's why they're leaving. There's no jobs because it's expensive to develop here. It's expensive to have large corporate anchor stores here. We have regressive taxes like the inventory tax on our small and local businesses. That's not been right-sized. They say it's for resource hoarding, but small businesses can't even afford to be open. How are they going to hoard resources? We need to roll back regulations that make it difficult to open businesses. And I think we need to remain an at-will state for employment right now, because we just need people to come at all.
Thanks, Rachel. Zach, I'll go to you next on kind of, the challenges of losing people and the costs of things and all these issues. Are you optimistic or pessimistic for the next 10 years for Anchorage?
I choose to be optimistic. I certainly feel discouraged by where we're at and what has led us up to this point. But I think we can all agree that we're not feeling very good about where we are now, but we want to find a way to turn the corner and actually make Anchorage a city that we can feel proud of and that will attract young, talented people to want to come work here. And when you look at the reason why people are moving out of state, why in particular young working age families don't want to be here, it comes down to the quality of our education. And then, what do we invest in education? We have teachers who are the only teachers in the country that aren't eligible for Social Security or defined benefits. Class sizes are going up. Resources are being cut back. Programs are being cut. Why would you want to be a teacher in Alaska at this point? It has to do with things like parks and taking advantage of where Alaska truly shines, right? So being able to preserve and enhance these places like the park strip, like the Chugach State Park and access to it. Addressing public safety, APD is going to be down 50 officers by the summer. That's scary, and we need to figure out how we're going to address that and other challenges to make sure that there's the quality of life people want, and that will encourage them to move here and stay here.
Thanks. And Mikel, kind of vision for 10 years, the next 10 years in Anchorage, based on all the challenges we're currently facing.
Yeah, I think the first thing I want to address is the leavers, right? The youth that essentially graduate high school and then decide to leave. And I can tell you there's one big gap that I saw personally when working on workforce development, and that's the lack of connection between vocational organizations and trade groups and builders and the entire trade community and schools. And the reason why I say that is because we have Alaska Works Partnership that does amazing free or low-cost training for the public every single week. And I don't know why we don't have high school students getting credit for taking those classes. Because as I was working on the initiative, we surveyed a lot of youth. And the number one piece of feedback we got was not, I don't want to do that work. It's, where do I learn about this? How can I learn more about how to do this? If most students knew that they could make really good money, within 2 to 3 years of getting out of school, probably more than get after 4 years of going to school, they would probably stay. But they're not aware. In fact, right now there are so many jobs coming to Alaska with the infrastructure bill that we don't have enough people for it, which is going to cause a whole bunch of rolling negative effects. We're going to have to bring out outside labor, just like when we had to bring out outside nurses, right? Which is going to raise the cost for us to do construction up here, which means everything's going to be more expensive as a result. And we have a lot of projects ahead. So do you think that's going to end? No, it's going to go on for a long time of bringing in outside work. And all that's going to do is make it more difficult for the residents here that are still operating off of the model that we have. So for me, what I'd like to do is see alignment of essentially our resources with the needs of the community. So public safety resources aligning with what the public safety concerns are, right? Like, are people leaving because of traffic? Or are they leaving because of neighborhood safety, right? What can we do to reprioritize that, right? Being real, because I rarely ever see an officer in the streets of my neighborhood, right? But I see them all the time on the highway. And honest truth, presence of police being visible makes people feel safe. I feel like we're failing there. I feel like we failed to also identify the opportunities. And that's the last thing I want to mention is the Port of Anchorage and the airport at Ted Stevens are literally the hubs of North America for e-commerce in the world. In fact, the majority of cargo that comes from Asia stops in the Port of Anchorage to get fuel. Doesn't do anything else, stops, gets fuel, leaves. And then we have the 4th largest airport by air cargo in the world. And yet, we're not capitalizing on this. Like, the airport's doing great investments with the refrigeration facility and everything else, but I don't feel like we're positioning Alaska's economy around that, let alone Anchorage. So I want to do what we can to monetize Anchorage as the hub for the state and for the world.
I appreciate that. Big answer.
Sorry.
Well, I want to thank you guys for coming. We're going to go to closing statements, but I really want to thank all of you for being here. It's been a really cordial, respectful debate. I really appreciate that. So we're going to go to closing statements and keep it as close as 2 minutes as possible. And we'll start with you. Yeah. We picked the order at random, so you're first.
Absolutely. For me, I just want to declaim for me, I've been invested in Alaska my whole life. I came back, and it wasn't because of the high cost of living. It wasn't because of the long winters. I came back to Alaska specifically because I wanted to invest my time and my family here. I was born here, and it doesn't feel right being away. And if I'm going to be here, I want to be able to have the best future for my family. And I think there's a lot of things we can do, but I think it takes fresh eyes. And I've worked on programs on a national and a state basis, and my specialty is fixing problems. I come in and I find ways to run things more efficiently with a vigor. And I want to be able to do that for the Assembly.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Mikel. We'll go to the next Zac Johnson for your closing statement.
Yeah. First off, having looked at the monitor, I want to show everyone I do, in fact, have a torso. You may not be able to see it, but it is real.
It's your blue. Yeah, I should have probably said don't wear a blue.
Yeah, no worries.
My fault.
Yeah. Shame on you, Jeff.
We'll color grade it a little bit.
Thanks. When I came up here in 2006, my plan was just to visit for a month. But, I fell in love with Alaska, and I was just so enticed by the opportunities here, right? There was a great university system that I was excited to be a part of and excited to graduate from. There were all sorts of wonderful job prospects out there. Finding an affordable apartment, was an easy thing to do back then. And, a lot of my contemporaries were similar people who had lived outside for a period of time, but they were in their 20s or maybe it was their first time in Alaska, and they just saw so much opportunity here that they chose to make it their home. And I don't see those same opportunities available today. It's a much different prospect, but we need to find a way to turn it around. And we've talked here today, and I think there have been a lot of good ideas shared about some of the things we can do to start to address that. My background has been in public service. That has always been a core value to me, to give back to the community, because I have always felt very grateful for the opportunities I've had. I've served at the federal level, state level, and the community level. And this is my next step to continue to serve my community that I care about and give back to Anchorage, and hopefully make it a place that we can all feel really proud to call home.
Thanks, Zac. And final closing statement, Rachel?
Oh, thank you. Saving the best for last, right? So I came to Alaska by choice. I've never lived anywhere more than 2 years in my entire life since I was born. And I brought my family here on purpose. This is the place. This reminds me of California when I was a child, right? You can play out front. You don't have to worry about it. You know your neighbors. You know who the people are around you, and you're immersed in the community. And I see that being taken away from us with bad policy. California was a fantastic place to live until about the 1990s, and bad policy took it down, and now it is one of the worst states in the union. And I see history repeating itself here. I've lived a life of service, so it was a very natural step for me to step into the public realm and say, I have the tools to fix that. I know what I hear from my neighbors, and I know I'm capable of listening and making choices. So I'm going to get involved because this place is worth the investment. It's worth the fight.
Thank you for that, Rachel. Again, I want to thank Zac Johnson, Rachel Ries, Ries,
You're good.
not Ries,
Not Ries.
and Mikel Insalaco for being here. This is District 6, Seat K, folks. The ballots go out next week on March 14th. The election concludes on April 4th. Again, I want to thank our sponsors, GCI, the IBW Local 1547, and the Alaska Political Report. And I want to thank all of our guests for being here for this race. And we're doing a series of the debates, and we're going to be doing all 7. So stay tuned and make sure to check them out. And make sure to vote when the ballots go out. Thanks again for our guests and for watching.